Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. My name is Dr. Brad Reedy, and tonight's topic is the identified patient. I thought about this recently because I was listening to some old podcasts and listening to some of the things that I was talking about a long time ago. I was looking for some specific ideas and quotes. I've been having lately a very similar discussion with people that are calling, both families that are inquiring about the wilderness therapy program, but maybe even more so for those who have been inquiring about our intensive program, our family intensive programs. And as I thought about this, I thought this would be a nice webinar to go back to, a nice broadcast to go back to, podcast. And I also noticed that it was the number one most listened to of all time. And I don't know why that is, that people are compelled to this one, with this one, but I added some stuff to it, especially in regard to some of the discussions that I've been having with people, and I'm excited to do it tonight. So let's talk about, first of all, the idea, the model of the identified patient. First of all, there is in our history of mental health treatment a history that's much more rich in treating individuals. I remember graduating with a doctoral degree in marriage and family therapy. I remember 25 years ago uh, having discussions with people about what I thought was progress in the areas of mental health. And the first wilderness program that I worked at before we started ours, there was almost no family work. You had a half an hour phone call with the parent, and that was virtually all they received from the program in terms of work. They came out for a graduation ceremony where they had one session on the last day, and there was nothing else in there. Letter writing was discussed on the phone calls, but with only a half an hour as a wilderness therapist to talk about that, you really couldn't get into much. And so, of course, when we started ours, we added phone calls, mid-program visits. We increased the time that we would talk to parents, and then on and on and on, we added more and more family features. But what I was surprised by, what was still in the 1990s, after having studied family systems work, still how common it was to pull the identified patient out of the system, to treat them, and then to plug them back into the system without really addressing the family system as the identified patient. And I was told that I was young and idealistic and a student. I was actually told by my supervisors not to spend that much more time on families, that they really weren't open to, willing, or capable of change. So our history in mental health, even when I entered the field, was still inclined toward treating individuals. There's an old analogy that I was taught while I was in graduate school early on that says, if a family gets into a car accident, they don't simply treat the one who was driving, they treat everybody. There's a lot of other systems metaphors that we were taught, but it's this idea that, yes, they're the one who absolutely earns their place as identified patient, and we try to think about the family system as the focus. I imagine that the resistance for that, for the most part, in the professional field, comes from the fact that many families don't want to be the focus. Many families, it's a lot more comfortable to have an identified patient, somebody to point at. I believe at Evoke, I believe with the people that show up here and the people that engage in the work that we offer to them, I believe those are the exceptions to the rule. And for some of you, might even have a narrative where you started off resistant or confused about why there was so much focus on the family. And that makes sense, because if in your life you have not struggled with the same kind of or similar symptoms as your child, it makes sense. If you're high functioning, successful, if for the most part your relationships outside of the one with your child are healthy and meaningful and enjoyable, it would make sense to you. It would make sense to anybody that why would you be the focus? I had a parent early on ask me the question, Brad, you talk so much about kind of non-blaming the parents, not suggesting to them this simple cause and effect relationship, and yet you spend so much time talking about family issues. Why is that? And I thought that's a fair question. And really because I think of it as a dance, right? It's a dynamic or a cycle. We can punctuate it. That's a family systems idea. We can punctuate it in terms of cause and effect, but that punctuation is somewhat contrived and arbitrary, right? Children come to us with certain characteristics. Those characteristics impact us as parents in certain ways. We respond, then that impacts the child, on and on and on. So the punctuation of the problem, or defining the problem by punctuating it in a certain way, it's arbitrary. But my answer to this father after I thought about it for a week was, you get to be a part of the healing. You get to be a part of a better life with your child. And if you want to contribute to a change, to a different kind of dance and dynamic, that's where the work comes in. And I've come to believe, I'm convinced of this, that one of the things that speaks to or supports or contributes to evokes success long term is the amount of energy that we put into families. And hopefully, we do that without triggering any kind of guilt or shame or ideas of blame. And I'll talk about that again a little bit more tonight. When we think about the identified patient, we think about them as the lightning rod, right? They're the one that is most symptomatic, that gets all the focus. But we also believe that they're serving a function in the system, if nothing else, to draw attention to something that needs change. In essence, it's the child saying to the family, this isn't working for me. I need something else. And yes, they might have a predisposition to addiction. They might have a learning difference. They might have a temperament that is difficult or challenging to anybody for that matter. All of those things can be true. And still, their symptoms, their struggle is suggesting, I need something else or something more. Another piece of it is, if you have a child that's struggling, like your children are, you need more resources. You need more positive input and support, right? If you have a child that's depressed or anxious or addicted or has an eating disorder, whatever it is, you need more than the average parent. And I think the last part of it that I would say is that, going a layer or two deeper, it's just so obvious to me that we all can benefit from more work. And the families that go through this process, that enjoy our work, they aren't always the families that have the highest success in terms of how their child does. They have varying levels of success when measured by how their child does. But the ones who rave about us, the ones who talk to their friends about us, have some combination of success with their child, and really the realization that this changes their life. Because the things I'm talking to you about, the things that we talk to you about, it's in the context of parenting children, but it's really not about children. It's about what it means to be a human being and what it means to be in relationship to other people, particularly those that struggle. But being in relationship to people who struggle is not that different in terms of the core principles that we're asked to understand and to live by. It's not that different than being in relationship to a coworker, to an employee, to a loved one who's not struggling, to a newlywed spouse, to a spouse of 25 years, on and on and on. They become the scapegoat, right? This sacrificial kind of lamb, this one that shows up needing the most help, but really it's a call for the family, for the parents, for everybody to look at something different. The idea of triangles in families was a family systems idea. And it was simply this idea that the triangle, right, a triad of people, is the most stable function, the most stable form in a family. Dyadic relationships are unstable because the conflict, the anxiety that happens between two people can cause people to retreat, escalate, pull away, attack, all those things. But if you have a child or somebody else that you can focus your anxiety and energy on, there's not a lot of conflict between, in this case, the parents. One of the earliest family therapists used to do something every time. when he was treating a family. He was treating adolescent children in Philadelphia, in the Philadelphia Child Guidance Clinic. And he would say to the family after a session or two, I want you to go home. And on the way home, I want you to stop for an ice cream or some treat and sit down and say to your child, you're fired. You're fired from being the identified patient. We're going to focus on what we need to work on, regardless of how well you do or how much you struggle. That's our commitment. So you don't have to be symptomatic for us to look at ourselves. Another founding school of therapy in Milan, Italy, talked about a similar kind of intervention that they called the Invariant diction. That every family with a child struggling, at some point the parents early in the process were assigned to go on a vacation. It could be across town, it could be anywhere. To leave the children with somebody they trusted, to be available if there's an emergency, but not to tell the children where they're going. Talk about it being a secret, a healthy secret that was just a privilege to the two parents. And the idea was to realign, to draw a circle around the executive system, the parental system, and to kind of push the child out of it. So early systems theorists started recognizing the function that the identified patient plays in the family and in treatment when they get there. I talk about this idea that really having a child is about transformation. Right? Being in a marriage or a spousal relationship is about transformation. And transformation usually comes from struggling and suffering and difficulty. Right? Our children stretch us if we allow them to. Or conversely, we ask them, we try to coerce them to get small and fit within our bandwidth. They scare us. The idea that I have is that knowing that your child is going to grow up and be okay means in some cases they're going to grow up entirely, uniquely different from anything that you can imagine. I mean, that's the idea, right? We want them to expand. And so to do that, we're going to have to kind of muddle through the difficulties. This is really, really, really hard stuff. It's hard to raise children when everything goes much closer to ideal than what most of us have dealt with, right? And then you add on top of it mental health or addiction issues, and it multiplies. It's exponentially difficulty. We start asking ourselves, are we co-participating? Is there a codependency with the child where I'm asking them to take care of us, where I'm trying to control them, where I see myself through their eyes? I see my worth, my value, my goodness through their eyes. Do I ask them to carry that on for me? Do I avoid seeking and speaking authentically because I want to control them? Do I try to get strategic to try to control them and control outcomes? That starts to set up, right, a dynamic, a relationship dynamic that's confusing, burdensome, painful, scary, uncomfortable, and most of all, it's unspoken. It's not identified. Melanie Klein is a famous developmental psychologist, and she talked about people go through two basic stages in life. The first one she described is the paranoid position. The paranoid position is there's something out there, right? Some other that can get me, can hurt me, can make me unhappy, that threatens me. The second position is what she called the depressed position, which is where I start to consider I might have something in this, right? This might be about me. So in the depressed position, it's called the depressed position because it can, in the early stages, feel defeating, deflated, and depressed, right? Like my happiness is my responsibility. My joy, my serenity is my responsibility. I mean, think about that comment, just that comment. How many messages in our culture, how many of us still fall into the trap of thinking that my children's behavior, that my children are responsible for my serenity? How can I have any kind of serenity if my child is struggling with addiction or mental health issues, right? It doesn't even follow logically that could make sense. And then we end up in treatment with our child, we end up in an Al-Anon meeting, and we learn that our responsibility is that our serenity is our own responsibility. And that old adage of you're only happy as your least happy child is insane. It's not their responsibility for us to be happy. And any loving parent, of course, is going to experience pain, sadness, and some fear when their child struggles. But what we do in this model is we go take care of those difficult emotions somewhere else with a therapist, with a sponsor, with a support group, listening to podcasts, reading books, doing what we have to do so that when we come back and engage the child in a conversation or an interaction, we're there for the child instead of asking, expecting unconsciously the child to be there for us. When the family pulls when the identified patient pulls the family into treatment, right, there's this transformation, hopefully, that the focus spreads far and wide. And again, it's most effectively done when there's not simple blame and shame. One of my difficulties, frustrations with some parenting education is that it is very blaming. It tells you if you follow this recipe, then everything will turn out fine. The problem with that model is it turns the children into objects. They don't have choice. They don't have a self in this equation, right? And it layers on top of the parents a kind of simplistic blame where the child is only a direct outcome of my behavior, and there's something more in it, right? Systems theory says that the fundamental premise of systems theory is the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. 1 plus 1 isn't 2. 1 plus 1 is 3. It's something else. So this is the kind of transformation that can occur. And again, you can pull away from your child a little bit, start to work on yourself, which is the foundation of intimacy and connection anyway. You listen to these broadcasts, you do the work that we ask you to do, hopefully again in a very loving, compassionate way, understanding that you come to this with your own wounds, with your own shame. And hopefully, just hopefully, things open up a little bit for you. And you can look at yourself, because the people that are responding to you, like me, like our therapist, are looking at you through compassionate eyes, understanding eyes, instead of judgment and blame. We try to shift the family, right? We ask for some differences. We ask for some differences in rules and in roles, not suggesting that it's going to be the cure, but suggesting that a shift will make a change. And that restructuring family systems is its own reward. You know, the old adage of virtue is its own reward? Being a healthier parent is being a healthier mother, father, husband, wife, friend, employee, employer. Healthy parenting is its own reward. The outcome of healthy parenting is not well-behaved children. The outcome of healthy parenting is peace and serenity and confidence and courage. That's the outcome of healthy parenting, is a happier, more meaningful, deeper, richer life. I was co-presenting years ago on intervention, right? I had an interventionist that was with me, and I think most people would think that the outcome of intervention is getting the loved one into treatment. And that is one of the hopes. But one thing I found fascinating as we developed our presentation together is the goal of intervention is shifting the family dynamics so that they more adequately support the person getting into treatment in an authentic, healthy way, and they don't support the continued struggle, addiction, whatever it is. So you're really looking for a family shift. The specific intervention itself and the goal to get somebody into treatment is a part of the bigger picture, but it's not all of it. And you can consider it a successful intervention, I learned, even if the person doesn't choose to go into therapy. And you maintain those changes and those shifts. And in many cases, the decision for that person to go into therapy happens sometime after the intervention. It takes a lot of pressure, too, off of everybody. It creates a tone in the intervention that isn't full of control and anxiety. I think what happens in treatment is the scapegoat becomes the hero. I have dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of stories of people telling me that their child, the most symptomatic one in the family, was the one that got them into this work, but they're thankful for it. And that's hard. Some people tell me it happens all the time, happened in the last week. If I tell this story too early, people say I'm insane and it's too early. And they're probably right. But for many of my clients over the more than 2 decades, they become grateful that their dreams did not work out the way they had planned. And that what they ended up with was something far richer than anything they probably would have found or been required to find if their child didn't struggle. Some related principles to the identified patient idea: homeostasis, and change back. Homeostasis is a systemic term from general sys theory that family therapists use to say if somebody makes a healthy change, the system is going to unconsciously, sometimes consciously, try to get that person to change back. When you set a healthy boundary with your children, nobody's going to applaud unless you have really enlightened children. And that's pretty exceptional. But most people are going to resist healthy change. So when we're aware of that, when you prepare for that, when you prepare for the change back energy, you're more successful often in continuing to make those changes. Equal finality and equal potentiality are also family systems terms that refer to the fact that you can have children that come from very different circumstances that end up very similar. And you can have children that come from very similar circumstances that end up very different. You can see that in your family, right? You can imagine somebody who was abused as a child ends up being a social worker, helping other abused children, right? You can also imagine social workers share an office together where one had a very traumatic childhood and one had a very nurturing and connected childhood. So they come to it for different reasons. Again, systems doesn't focus on the blame, the starting point, as much as it says, here's the dance, here's the dynamic that has evolved, that has grown, that is set over time. Can we make a shift out of it? I already talked about punctuation. Modeling humility and vulnerability while letting go of the outcome and shifting the focus of your energy. This is another one of those principles that I believe in so strongly. Your children don't need you to be perfect. If they do, they're doomed. What they need is for you to make your life the project. The minute you take ownership of your serenity, your happiness, how well you sleep at night, that's part of what you've done by sending your child to our program. The minute you shift your focus from you and away from them, it changes resistance, defensiveness. It opens things up. It models vulnerability. The best way to encourage vulnerability in somebody else is to model it. For years, I would have group members say, I don't feel safe to share in this group. And I would teach them the way that you get safety is you take off the armor first. And that's scary because you could get hurt. And I can't guarantee that somebody won't say something judgmental or unkind. But it's so hard for anybody, parents included, to refocus on them, especially when the identified patient is so good at playing the role of the identified patient. But it's what works. That's what I know. It's what works. We know it in the research. We know it because of what we've seen in our experience. I know it because I've been doing it for a couple of decades, and when it goes that direction, everything in the family shifts. The pressure's off the child. And then it's not about who's right, who's wrong. It's not about a zero-sum game. It's about everybody looking at themselves. Learning to say you're sorry, learning to be wrong, learning to lose. A 10th step, right? The 10th step of the 12 steps is taking a daily moral inventory. How much better would families be? Would partners be? Would spouses be if everybody was practicing the 10th step as a ritual and also as an idea of becoming accountable and saying sorry and making an amends for the things that I've done. And embarking on your own journey. You know, the idea of the hero's journey, as taught by Joseph Campbell, part of where I got the title from my book, was that the hero, when asked to depart from the known, from what was comfortable, usually resists the call initially. And then sometimes we have to be shoved into our new reality, right? Somebody gets sick, somebody loses a job, a child struggles, and then we're willing to do things, take steps, walk into rooms that we weren't willing to walk into before. And I'll say to you from the professional perspective, I wish I could show you all the professionals in the field that we work with and show you how many of them are afraid to do their own work. It's predominant. And they tell themselves they're not struggling, right? Things are going okay, and their child are doing well enough. But when you see a professional, when you meet somebody who's done some work, who's done their own work, who does their own work, it feels very, very, very different. We, of course, want to make the family the identified patient and intervene on the entire system. Organizing boundaries, right? Trying to get clear, starting with, like I said, starting with you discovering to some degree your own wounds, your own history, your own blind spots, right? Self, developing a more whole self, a more authentic self, is the first step in recognizing boundaries. Being able to set a boundary. Giving the family a chance to heal as a whole, like the car accident analogy. Allowing and giving each person to have a voice, right? See, healthy family systems are connected, but not connected in such a way that there has to be consensus. They're connected in a way that still allows for individual differences. I did something a couple of years ago. My wife does most of the shopping around the holidays for the kids. It's kind of a joke around our house, and I know I'm not the only one because I've seen lots of other jokes about it in our culture. And so I decided one year I wasn't going to buy the biggest present, but I was going to buy each one of the children something that was related to them that was different from me, right? Something that would symbolically show them that I saw them. So all of the presents were given away on Christmas morning. Celebrate Christmas in our house, and it was my turn. Nobody knew about this, not even my wife. And I said, "Hey, I bought you all," and I just started bursting into tears because I thought about my own childhood and about not being seen by my own parents. So I gave one of my children a book on astrology and crystals and new age ideas. And I went down the line and gave them each something different. So that was symbolically my attempt to try to honor the difference, to hear their voice through the way I responded by my little gift. If done properly, the identified patient will understand that they are loved, even prior to knowing how to love themselves. And remember, when I talk about love, I talk about it not as affection or warmth, but as capacity. And there's always hope. There's always hope. What I wanted to add for emphasis tonight compared to previous years when I've done this broadcast, I wanted to add the idea of an entry point. When I talk to families that call me about a family intensive, what I say to them is, we're going to start with you. You know, you'll get on the proverbial hot seat first. You want to start with the most resourceful member of the family, right? The most capable, one with the strongest ego in the family, the healthiest ego. And that can be difficult for families. And even though I prepare families for that, sometimes they struggle with it. They kind of hear the words, but they come in saying, yeah, but I know we're here because my daughter has an eating disorder, or my son's a drug addict, or my child has an anxiety disorder and won't go to school. But if you allow it to go the other direction, like I said just Monday night during the broadcast, what I love about the family work, when families dive into it, the kids almost always come reluctantly. But by the end, they say, I feel like I was given a voice, that I had an advocate. And the parents walk away with increased hope. But where that hope comes from is the realization that they have a different project than they thought they had before they came to the intensive. And that now they have a project that they can control, which is them, their lives, their healing, their work. That's what creates anxiety and depression in us so often, is we're trying to control things that are outside of our control and paying little to no attention to the things that we can control. That's why the serenity prayer is said at the end of most every 12-step meeting. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and I'm so forgetful, give me the wisdom to know the difference. So we find our way in through the parents. Sometimes I've had families where the identified patient is the most resourceful one, the most willing to jump into their work because they've had some treatment. They've sat in circles before where they've been asked, invited to look at, to be vulnerable. And so they're more willing to do it, modeling for the parents. When I talk about honoring the defense, what I'm saying is the defense is doing important work. The symptom is doing important work. And most of us, most natural impulses for most people, including therapists, is I'm going to get rid of the defense. Let's make this symptom go away, because the symptom is dangerous in and of itself. It's damaging in and of itself. But if I can pay a little bit of attention to listening to it before I try to get rid of it, I also get access to the wisdom, to the message it's trying to tell all of us. And there is great wisdom in the defense. Mental health and mental illness. Mental illness is basically this, right? There's a symptom that has a certain theme or pattern of behavior. We call that theme and pattern a diagnosis, right? So the symptom fits into a category, tells a bigger picture and says, this is a borderline personality disorder. This is an addict. This is an anxiety disorder. This is a depression, right? But going backwards, the symptom just serves to cover up the wound, right? To distract, to protect, to numb, to get out of the feeling of whatever the wound is, the hurt, that is either one specific big T trauma or somewhere in the middle or small T trauma. And that feels better than feeling the wound. The symptom, even though it causes problem, feels better. So that's mental illness. So when somebody says to me, my wife is a borderline, my husband's a narcissist, do you see that? My response is, I see the pattern of behavior, yeah, but that's not what these eyes see. I don't see the diagnosis. That's just a shorthand for me to communicate to other professionals. But what I see is somebody who's scared. I see a child who wasn't seen. I see a child that came from a system that didn't have healthy or safe attachments, or somebody that was traumatized, right? And I try to find that person. And when I find that person and they feel seen, they can start to heal in that safe place. Reducing children to objects or symptoms, right? It's so easy to do. And the symptoms actually win. When I was working, I did some part-time work for an eating disorder clinic many years ago. I've come in as a guest speaker. One of the things I learned was that the anorexic girls, this was a female program, that the anorexic girls, that they would wear extra clothing. And I was curious about that, because I would imagine they would try to make themselves look thinner. I thought that's what the body dysmorphia and the disease was doing. But what they would say is a couple of things. They wanted to hide how skinny they were because they knew the doctors were gonna, the therapists were, the parents were gonna give them negative attention. But secondly, another reason was if they wore bigger, baggier clothes and people thought they were heavy, which was their greatest fear, then they could blame it on the clothes. But most importantly, what I learned was if you're talking about weight, the symptom wins. If you're talking about the defense or the symptom, it's winning, right? Because you're not talking about the wound. You're not talking about the hurt, the sadness, the pain. So if we pay attention to the symptoms, it's serving its purpose. Right? When I go out to an adolescent boys group and I see a whole bunch of insecure boys being inappropriate in their language and their joke telling, I realize these are scared boys. And this is what scared boys do in our culture. And if I forget that they're scared boys, if I pay too much attention to the symptom, if I believe it, the story that it's trying to tell me, it wins. Learning to be right, learning to be wrong, excuse me, and the danger of trying to be a good parent. I talk about this idea of the danger of trying to be a good parent or a good spouse, is that the problem with that is that everything then becomes in service of me being seen as good, right? If I need to be a quote unquote good parent, then when you get mad at me, that's going to be a threat. If you tell me that I did something to hurt you, I'm going to have a hard time integrating that, hearing that, sitting with that. Same with all relationships. So the idea, like Carl Jung said, it's when he said, I would rather be whole than good. Or my friend, when he met some missionaries and they said, do you want to learn how to be happy? And he said, I want to learn how to feel all of my feelings. And that we can accept our warts, right? And my experience is the only way we develop an acceptance for those parts of us is by being around somebody who accepts those and sees those. Not by somebody who gets anxious or judges it. Listening, saying you're sorry, showing up as a self, and connecting to your child, right? That's the task. The boundaries are a little bit easier if we can do that stuff. The boundaries are not the solution. The boundaries come out of this place of self, of authenticity. This is a quote from Jamie Gill, my therapist who's also written about 15 books. She says, it's important to recognize the defense is doing important psychological work, or the energy required to maintain it would not make sense. Ripping away defenses does not improve the situation. Taking them away before the person is able to tolerate what the defense is masked leaves the person worse off than before. At least before, with the defense, he or she could function. Now he or she is incapable. Both cruel people and inadequate therapists are famous for a desire to destroy defenses without considering the consequences. How amazing is that? And again, one of the responses that I get from therapists that I'm training is, but Brad, we're kind of paid, hired to kind of fix the problem, the symptoms. And I've said to them over the years, this is how you do it. I worked a group this summer covering for my partner, Matt Hoig, at our Entrada location. And this is what I did. This is how I did it. And they were much more able to heal when I said, that makes sense why you were doing that. I want to understand it. I imagine that was your best solution at the time. Thank you for telling me. And I want to understand the hurt that it was protecting. Motivational Interviewing is a fantastic research-based book that talks about overall honoring defenses. Your purpose is to understand the life before you, to see the world through this person's eyes rather than superimposing your own vision. Accurate empathy, they say, an active interest in an effort to understand the other's internal perspective, to see the world through his or her eyes. We don't mean sympathy, a feeling of pity for or camaraderie with the person. Neither do we mean identification, as in, I've been there and I know what you're experiencing. Let me tell you my story. Those may not be present, but empathy is an ability to understand another's frame of reference and the conviction that it is worthwhile to do so. Rogers and his students describe well the therapeutic skill of accurate empathy. It is to sense the client's inner world of private personal meanings as if it were your own, but without ever losing the quality as if. The opposite of empathy is the imposition of one's own perspective, perhaps with the assumption that the other views are irrelevant or misguided. It's so easy to do as a parent. And here's my version of what motivational interviewing and Carl Rogers was saying. To understand and truly hear someone, sometimes you have to lose your mind. Right? So you've got to get so outside of yourself to sit with, see, and hear somebody. The best thing you can do is volunteer to be an identified patient yourself. Tell your child what you're working on. Tell them what you're learning. Tell them you recognize that you have some stuff to look at, to focus on, and that you're going to shift your focus from making them the project to making you the project. I want to be very clear about that. That doesn't mean we don't intervene. Don't hear that. People who do this intervene authentically, courageously, assertively, taking away the blame language, right? Just talking about your stuff for the sake of your stuff. The gifts that come to us through this process. It shifts from gifts away from resentment toward our child for taking us off the life we had planned to the gift that it can give us. If we don't pay attention, if we don't honor the life that we have, we'll never have the wisdom that it's trying to offer us. Taking ownership of your feelings in your life, it doesn't work, folks, to tell your children how upset you are, worried you are, concerned you are. That's how we were parented, but it's really not the thing. It's not a child's responsibility to show up a certain way so their parent feels better. You can obviously think about ways that would be harmful. And even in your own life as a child of your parents, what if it was your job to make your parents happy, to choose the life that they wanted, to choose the career, to choose the spouse, right? You know that that's damaging. We spend a lot of our adult lives trying to pay less and less attention to what people think of us. And it doesn't make us hedonists or insensitive. It comes with a greater capacity for compassion and empathy and love for other people. Making your serenity and your esteem your project, not your child's. Discovering the treasure and the wisdom this journey has to offer. You know, the goal I always say with parenting is I want to be the first call if my child is in a crisis. I want to be the first call in the sense that I don't want them to think that they're going to get a spoken or unspoken "I told you so," or that my response is going to be right, a big gasp of anxiety. If I respond with the gasp of anxiety, I automatically I become somebody that's not safe, somebody that has to be taken care of. So I go to my meetings, to my therapy, to my support group. I read my books so that when my child shows up in pain, struggling, even if it's self-inflicted, I can remain curious, connected, compassionate, with the mindset of what can I do to help? If you're not that person, if you're going to respond with anxiety, frustration, anger, disappointment, they're going to call somebody else, right? That's part of what attracts them to that peer group that we don't like, that they have, is that in many ways it comes without judgment. And then developing gratitude, moving from having them be the scapegoat to the hero in the family. All right, I'm going to go over our upcoming events. So send in any questions now that you have. And then when I get to the end of my slides, I'll take the live questions. We ask all parents to go to 6 12-step support groups while their child is with us. So I have listed here Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, Alateen is for teenagers. Adult Children of Alcoholics is also adultchildren.org. So you can go to that. Just look at what it feels like. Look at what it feels like. Look what you're asking. If nothing else, look what it feels like to ask your child to walk into a circle of people and tell a little bit of their truth. Right? It's hard. You'll get an increased amount of empathy, if nothing else. You can also go to refugerecovery.org or NAMI.org to find resources, classes, meetings in your area. If you want to listen to these broadcasts on the podcast app, they're available there on your iPhone. Just search Evoke Therapy Programs on the podcast app. On your Android device, download the SoundCloud app and search Evoke Therapy Programs there, or you can go to soundcloud.com on any computer and find us there by searching Evoke Therapy Programs. One note about this, we're looking for some testimonials. You can keep it anonymous, or you can put your name to it, of people who have been listening to the podcast, who find them meaningful, helpful in their lives. What are your favorites? What do you get out of them? How does it help you along your journey? Those kinds of things. So email us at webinar@evoketherapy.com. Webinar, singular. Webinar@evoketherapy.com to give us any testimonials. Or you can just email me directly at brad@evoketherapy.com. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram using the handle @evoketherapy. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs. The Alumni Foundation that helps people that can't afford therapy, you can find on Facebook by searching Evoke Family Foundation. Our blog always has new content. My book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, is available audio, Kindle electronic versions. Also, you can buy a paperback by going to Amazon. The next intensive, I didn't take this off, but February is full. March, we have some spaces available, March 27th through 31, if you want to do a deep dive into your own work. And I always say when I announce these, I do this every year for myself. If you want to do a deep dive, come to Finding You. 6 or 7 other adults, looking at yourself, looking at your history, figuring out how that shows up in your day-to-day life, in relationships with your child, with your spouses, with others. You can also email us at intensives@evoketherapy.com. We also have custom intensives for families or couples. Parent support groups coming up. Monday, February 11th, you will love and enjoy Birgit Show, who is running our parent support group in New York this month. I will be in Southern California on Sunday the 24th. That's the day of the Academy Awards, so we moved it up a little earlier so you can get home and watch those if you want to. Excuse me. Also, I'll be in the Bay Area February 28th. Email Melanie@evoketherapy.com for more information. We ask all current families to come to a workshop, multifamily, experiential, psychoeducational, get to meet the staff, have some of the experience. You can combine this with a visit to your child if your child's therapist thinks the timing is right. The next one is February 16th through 17th. So that's coming up soon. Also, we have one in March at our Entrada location. Contact Melanie@evoketherapy.com for more information or to RSVP. Pursuit trips are for families or young adults. Think therapy light, reconnecting to your therapy. Think kind of a vision quest, a kind of experiential journey all over the world. Any kind of activity. All right, I'm happy to answer any live questions you might have. First question, can you talk more about triangulation and what it looks like when the third person is removed? It usually can be difficult. It can be challenging, right? If the child is removed, people often report that the conflict, while focused on the child, may have had a lot to do with the differences in parenting. So if I have to deal with you, I'll use an example about this. It's a lot easier, not easy, but it's a lot easier to go to my therapist and talk about everybody in my life. The hardest person to talk about in my therapy session is my therapist. To tell her I felt hurt last week, or I felt angry last week, right? So the minute I take other people out of the equation, I start to work on the relationship. I have to deal with, confront, take the risk of showing up authentically and communicating about my feelings as they relate to the other person. That's very difficult to do. Think about friendships that are built on common enemies, right? Complaining about, gossiping about somebody else. But if you had to talk to the other person, about your feelings toward the other person, think about how much more difficult, risky, challenging that would be. So that's the essence of triangulation, is somebody else is brought into the relationship so that the anxiety and conflict can be focused at that person, so that the individuals in the dyad don't have to deal with each other. Looks like that's all the questions I have so far tonight. So happy that you joined us, and we have a good crowd tonight. So thank you for joining us. I hope these are helpful. Like I said, email me, brad@evoketherapy.com, if you want to share some of your thoughts, testimonials, ideas, feedback, favorite podcast or webinar. Happy to do that. Share that connection with you. Please do that. Hope these points of contact are helpful. Thank you, for on behalf of your children, for joining these and being willing to do your work. I assume that the people that show up here are those that are willing to take the risk and be vulnerable and really model that for your children. You can't do anything more important. We're going to do more and more open forums. So the next open forum, we had so many questions on Monday night. We're going to do these almost every other one now. We'll mix them in. So any question you can send in advance. You can just show up. You can invite family, friends, siblings to these. The next one will be Monday, February 11th, this coming Monday at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. So look forward to that. Thanks for joining us this evening. Have a great weekend, and talk to you next week. Bye-bye.